The problem that you're discussing is probably the greatest issue in every business I consult with.
It's not about the number of emails, because essentially with every email that you're sending to that particular individual, you're increasing the probability of receiving a spam report. In this day and age, you need to do everything you can to kill the spam reports.
It is a numbers game. The volume you drive through the top, the amount that you're able to convert to opportunities, and then the ones that you're able to convert into sales. And if you get better in each one of those metrics, guess what? Sales go up, profit goes up.
I was like, fuck it, I'll propose to her. I went to a shop, bought a ring, and then later on in the park, I just proposed to her. Now, the fun story is, when I went on my knee and proposed to her and say, would you marry me? She didn't know what to answer. And I said to her, wait a minute, I have to tell you something before you answer, actually. And what I did tell her, I was already married. so that is...
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here. We have real, raw conversations with some of the most impactful and influential people on this planet. We love to have normalized conversations, not just the highlight reels, but also to be able to really blend the advancement of not just strategy and tools and tactics, but the humanization of how we can do that in every aspect of our lives. How do we make ourselves more relatable, more connectable, and be able to give ourselves the ability to truly start to scale who we are, what we want, and the things we want in this world? And our guest today is certainly an expert at this. He's not just an expert in B2B sales. And for those of you who don't know those acronyms, business to business sales, but somebody who's really operated in more of a way of understanding complex sales cycles, multiple buyers, and a whole variety of different things. And now is utilizing technology and AI to be able to help build and blend this beautiful advancement with technology with the human components that really are going to connect and move things forward. He's also an individual and a man who identifies as a father, but one who works very, very adamantly to be able to build and create opportunities for his life. So he really integrates his life as best as possible. But like those of us who want to be present everywhere, sometimes we feel the weight of that and can feel tired. But my friend Frank Sondors, it is a pleasure to have you here with us today. And I'm looking forward to jumping in with you.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Yeah, it's really good to be on the show. So yeah, I am a father. I typically say I'm not the best father because I'm typically never around. I typically start my my day at about 10 o'clock in the morning. The kids are already, off to school. And then I'm pretty much done every day at about midnight. Every day, Monday to Friday. And I've been doing this for the last, now nearly 2 years. That's how long the company exists. Essentially, for me, you typically need to sacrifice somewhere for a bit, and a bit that means typically like a year or two. So yeah, I typically would, you typically have this maybe time in your life where for a year or two, you're just super busy because either you're building a company, whatever that is. And yes, you will not spend time with your family. Yes, a lot of people say, I would never do this, to my kids. I always spend time with them. But yeah, this is where, I'm not necessarily, the best sort of human when it comes to my own kids. But I'm sure they're going to forgive me, once this company's going to go big, etc. So yeah, spend, over a decade in gazillions of different companies. The first one was Google, selling, ads essentially to lots of advertisers. Then I worked for a company called SimilarWeb, analyzing big data, all data about competitors, etc., and selling essentially that data. Guess what? A lot of people naturally want to find out everything they can about their competitors. Where's the traffic come from, etc. This is essentially what sharpened my mind, specifically in sales, and how to find all the information I can about my competition. So it was a really, cool place to work. And especially if you're the sort of what I would call red ocean individual. So I'm like a red ocean guy. I really love that I have a lot of competition, big market, a lot of competition. And you just need to figure out, even though when I start a company, that this company is going to fly. So, and it did fly. We literally, scaled from $0 to $3 million in less than 12 months. So yeah, I'm more of a red ocean guy. So I work at SimilarWeb, and then I work for a machine learning company in New York called Black Crow, predicting, real-time conversion intent. And then yeah, my last gig, I was a VP sales for a company, for a sales team of about 50 or so. And that was really the last thing that I did. And at that point, this is when I realized that, back in the days, it was, growth at all costs. So you're literally plowing more bodies to hit your pipeline targets and revenue targets, right? That was really the only way, because the legacy tech that exists out there is built around bigger teams. Bigger teams typically means more revenue. And that's how they would charge also to the customers per seat. That's never how I looked at the world. If you're in a capitalist society and you're looking to generate revenue, you want to max out margins. You want to essentially generate maximum possible pipeline with the least possible headcount. And that was just not possible. So it was super, super frustrating as a former VP sales. So as a result, I decided to start my own company. So ultimately, leveraging my, let's call it domain expertise, having been in sales, for over a decade, and then being in tech software for a decade, I thought to myself, why would I now sell, software for somebody else? So some sort of CEO, even though they were great CEOs, but I could literally build my own company and go after the problem, that was so frustrating to me. So I'm literally building the software for my former self. So for a lot of VP sales out there, and looking to give hard time to the big boys in our space, because it's highly unlikely they're going to change the software to a type of software where essentially they'll be delivering a lot more output, where they will be reducing, headcount over time. So that's why there's a lot of new gen software popping out there. So we're not the only one. There's thousands of other softwares. They essentially help companies to increase output levels in sales, accounting, you name it, right? And you can see companies like IBM, Google, and other companies that are removing, particular job areas, like, for example, customer support, right? They're cutting down massively on labor. And that's literally what we're going through across, all orgs in a company. And we're just going to do that in sales. We're just going to do that very well. We want to own what we call the top of the funnel. That's our vision, help companies generate pipeline with the least possible headcount, right? It sounds very simple, but actually it's a very huge problem to be solved. And it's so huge that we didn't build just one software. We actually built multiple softwares to do that. We're crazy people that actually build just, a lot of softwares. And in less than 2 years, we right now have 6 products that we built.
That's awesome, man. Wow, you baked a lot into that few minutes there, and you covered everything from your own judgment and opinion of yourself as a father, to the sacrifices that we need to make, to your story and your journey, to where you're at today and the solutions that you're creating and the problems that exist in the market. I mean, you put a lot in there, and I say that with I really actually appreciated witnessing just kind of that evolution of your own consciousness as you're kind of grounding in this conversation, right? One of the things that I want to start with, because there is a lot there that I want to unpack, and we're going to through the course of this conversation, but I didn't even get a chance to even ask you a question yet, which I loved. And yet you did give us a very thorough overview of the things that you've done and some elements of who you are. I realize that right now, a big portion of your focus is with SalesForge and with building and developing the solutions that you are today. Outside of what you do, who are you, Frank, and how would you identify who you are as a human in the world, independent of the solutions you're building and what you're doing? How would you describe who you are, how you operate, and maybe give us that type of a flavor for now?
Sure. So I'm typically the guy that drinks 5 to 6 cups of coffee a day, and typically has like 2 or 3 monsters every day. I know this sounds extreme, but I've been doing this for quite some time, and I do check in with the doctors, and it seems like I'm still fine. There's nothing to worry about, which is very, very interesting. Let's call it that way. But that's typically, what I do literally on a daily basis. Apart from that, right? But apart from having the caffeine intake and the energy drink intake, I typically do about 10 to 20 meetings in a day. That's the velocity that I operate at. So that's a lot of meetings. Typically very successful companies, the founders essentially in the companies and a lot of also, key members of the team, they're fully rammed when it comes to the calendars, right? They're either speaking to customers, which is something you should be doing 90% of your time. If you're a VC backed, you will be speaking to investors time to time. And of course, you should be speaking naturally to your team. But yeah, I'm typically fully stacked. And to me, it's super important that you're speaking to the customers essentially on a daily basis and trying to speak to as many as you can. So yeah, my former 3 managers, when they did a perf review around who is Frank, and they have to write down the comments, etc. 3 of the managers / CEOs would typically write down that Frank is a machine, and that literally means the machine. And I think it implies more to sales. So naturally, I spent in sales for over a decade, and I was typically the top sales rep, or one of the top sales reps, right? So I never had a problem to be top of the leaderboard, because sales or speaking to prospects gives me a dopamine hit. So essentially, the more people I speak to, the more energized I am. So when it comes, around 11 p.m. midnight, I'm still pumped and energized. So for example, yesterday I had a really hard time to go to bed, and I was awake till 3 a.m. And I just couldn't, because I had so much energy, because I had so many customer conversations. So I have a hard time to sleep because of so much energy that I get by speaking to people. Whereas for other people, naturally, the more people they speak to, they get tired, right? And they're fully exhausted and just want to go home, crash, and etc. And I'm totally opposite. So I always say, you need to figure out what gives you the dopamine hit, because the job isn't a job anymore. It's a hobby. Right? And when you're doing something that becomes like a hobby, or what I would typically say, it's a video game. So if your job is a video game, damn, we're playing a video game here. Every day it's fun, right? So that's exactly, I think, how I look at, working here at SalesForge. It doesn't matter whether I'm a CEO or not. The CEO just means, I hire some people, I fire some people, etc. But ultimately, what I do as a CEO and where my key responsibility is the go-to-market team. So I currently own that. So I own the go-to-market team here at SalesForge, while my two other co-founders own the product engineering team. So I'm also, because I spent over a decade in sales, it was obvious that I should lead the go-to-market team. And we're also crazy people, not just myself, but my founders, where we don't have any managers underneath us. So we scaled from 3 co-founders to 40 people in 12 months. So we have no mid-managers, like nobody. Everybody's reporting into founders. We don't do one-to-one meetings with folks at all every single week, unless the person really wants to talk to us. They can book in a meeting. But imagine we have 40 people underneath us, and we only do team meetings, right? So whether you're a sales team, marketing team, whatever that is, right? So we discuss, what's happening in that function, every single week, rather than having one-to-one meetings. And that's because we're hiring autonomous humans. So I don't know. Yeah, the best, keyword. Yeah, it's not just, my former managers, also I think my teammates also back in days. And essentially, the other way to look at me, I'm very intense. And I typically believe the bar is here. And I pride myself in delivering, right, and achieving the target. While for other people, they just want to, take it a bit easy, let's call it, and enjoy life. And I'm not the guy that enjoys life. If I go down the beach somewhere in Greece, for example, and I'm laying down and theoretically I'm sunbathing, but I'm not. I'm picking up my phone, I'm going on LinkedIn, and I'm prospecting because I'm bored, right? Because I'm not getting the dopamine hit, getting the suntan. I'd rather be sitting in the office. I know it sounds very weird, but that's how I am.
I don't think it sounds weird. I think that there's a whole lot of things within our culture that also suggest that is the way to live in some respects. I think the part that jumps out at me most is for you to talk about the dopamine hits and where that is and what that does to regulate your system. You also very clearly said, I'm not the guy who's going to enjoy life. And there's a part of me that sits here and wonders, what's the fucking point of living life if we don't find a way to ground ourselves and enjoy it, right? And so there's like an interesting just dynamic that exists there between even what you're saying, because dopamine would typically mean joy, right? And enjoy, and you're feeding in some ways energy. I would suggest it's a matter of where you choose to deploy it, right? And so I think that what I want to be clear on, and I say this very clearly because I don't ever want my belief or the way I live or even what I say to suggest that anybody else doesn't have complete freedom to make the right choices for them. I'm one of those that says I actually want people to have freedom to decide how they want to live their lives, what they want to go after, what they're going to sacrifice, what they're not, but to do it with awareness and intentionality, right? And so I would suggest in a lot of ways, you are self-aware, and you're even up to the point of even how you were judging yourself as a father, aware of the choices you're making, at least within this season, right? Now, why I slow down and say this is a lot of what you say doesn't sound crazy to me at all. In fact, I deeply identify with a lot of the stuff that you talk about. right? I
But
also was
it sounds
somebody.
crazy to other people. I think that's the
Yeah, which I don't give a fuck what anybody else thinks about me if they think I'm crazy or not. I've been told I'm crazy all my life. But what I am trying to ground is that there is a lot that I recognize in you that was also in me. And I would suggest still is, with some slight different frames. And I'm only giving this context because I think it's important as I ask you some of these other next questions. Great example, right? I don't know that you know my story. I'm not going to go deep on it, but when I was a little kid, run over by a truck, my arm was torn from my body, reattached, 24 surgeries. I had to make a lot of choices very early how I was going to live. Was I going to live in pain, live on a couch, or am I going to go do things, right? A lot of that also transitioned into like this. I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. So I was a hard worker. I was consuming 900 to 1200 milligrams of caffeine. By the age of 27, I'd built a $10 million business and we were growing and scaling. But that was also in elements when I started to see where my shame was driving me, where my priorities were actually misaligned, where I was chasing the outcomes, but not enjoying any part of any other aspect of my life, right? And hitting adrenal fatigue and shutdown and all these different things. Now, I'm not suggesting that's coming for you. Not at all. For me, it was a wake up to help me realize where I wasn't living congruently, and I've shifted significantly. So what I do want to come back to, and then we're going to unpack. Trust me, I love what you're doing in your business. We're going to talk about it. We're going to unpack it. We're going to highlight the problems and the solutions that are there. I promise you that. But I also never want to lose sight of the fact that even when we're building and scaling things, we're always grounding in who we are as humans. Right? Yep. So you're a father. Mm-hmm. And you, in some ways, flippantly dismiss, like, yep, I'm the worst father ever, like almost like as if it doesn't matter. But yet I also can sense and feel that that is an area that you carry some level of guilt, weight, and shame, because I think there's a part of you that knows that what you want and how you want to show up as a father isn't aligned in this current moment. Mm-hmm. And so my question for you is, if you're honest with yourself and you reflect back outside of these 2 years, have you always been the work to the limit guy to not have the time with your family? Are you evolving because you're in a season of building something? And I don't want to be leading, but I would ask you to be really honest. Pre these last 2 years, how would you have rated yourself on that side, the dynamic between work and father?
Well, I would say, prior to building this company, I was still always a workaholic. I think intrinsically you never change. So I've been doing this since I think like 16 or something, since I really got my first job. And then I started to work.
I've been doing it since my first job. My first business I built when I was 12, bro. I get it. Like
my first job was working as a sandwich artist at Subway, in the UK. And then from there on, I somehow really enjoyed working 60 to 80 hours a week. Again, it feels odd, but anyway, I was always working a lot. Sure, I met my missus, and yes, we have 2 great kids, etc. And even back then, I spend. Sure, I spent a lot more time back then, but right now I'm taking it to the extreme, to where you come home, she's already sleeping. Then she wakes up in the morning, I'm sleeping, and she's already, gone to work. So you could say pretty much that every single week, Monday to Friday, we're not really seeing each other. And then we're seeing each other during the weekend only, right? But what we are doing, and I think what you should do with your partner, you should, sort of divide and conquer. So for me, that means, I want to go and build a career. Yes, it takes, a couple of years, very intense, etc. And I want you to look, after the kids, because she's much better suited to look after the kids than I am. I don't even have the skill set, I think, as a dad to even do that. But also at the same time, other couples, what they would want to do, is they want to divide responsibilities. And when you divide something, again, I come from a business standpoint. If you divide something, then you're not really focused. So somebody needs to focus. Like
somebody has to own the core role. Yeah.
And I know what you mean if it means looking after kids, then like pretty much you do 89% of looking. So one of us has to do that. And she's just much better equipped. For different reasons. Language is like one of them. So, cause our kids, speak a few languages, but, she wants to make sure that, the kids are, my wife, she's Lithuanian. And she wants to make sure that they speak Lithuanian. And I don't speak any Lithuanian, for example. So it kind of makes sense that she would, teach Lithuanian to our kids, etc. Anyway, so that's like one reason, like this, like a language reason. She wants to make sure that when our kids grow up, They actually speak the language, of the country where she was born in, right? So, fair enough. Then maybe that's kind of like one of kind of reasons. Plus, she's just doing a much better job than I am. So you also have to think from what I call the competence standpoint. Who of the two parents is better suited to look after? Who's more competent, just generally, and who? So there's another thing. Who gets also again a lot more dopamine hits to do that? And she gets, exponentially more dopamine hit than I would. Maybe it's my DNA, whatever that is, right? So, but you can see this, let's call biology. You can see this energy levels and many, many different things. Now, would she call me a bad husband or not, or something like that? Actually, no, because this kind of, we have been together for like 11 years already. So we know each other for a long time. So I've always been that sort of individual. So in her eyes, nothing has changed. That Frank Sondors is a workaholic. That's it, So you kind of get used to that, I think. It would be odd if I would be sitting on the couch all day long. It's just, that's just not a thing in my life. So yeah, I mean, you are a bad father, I think, for a bit. And I think, the way to look at it is, I'm a bad father until the kids are, let's say, maybe 10, 12 years old. And I think she's much better suited with that. I think fathers are a lot more valuable, sort of, beyond the age of 12. That's just my personal opinion. I think there's a lot more value, I think, that I can add to my kids when they're older, not when they're younger. Because that's where my competence lies.
How old are your kids now?
So they're 9 and 6.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm not here to debate or say any of your beliefs are incorrect. It's to understand where you're coming from. Right.
Yeah,
and that's where I say the piece that I would ask then, and this is just more curiosity, right? You had said that to build anything, it comes down to the sacrifices that we choose to make.
Yep.
Right. And then you defined those sacrifices to say, and typically that sacrifice is through a lens of short term, right? 1 year or 2, right? And now you're 2 years into the business. And this is also something that, though you're to the extreme, right? You talked about this because you weren't always to the extreme, but you've always been a workaholic. Mm-hmm. This and all of what you even discussed, not seeing your partner, not seeing your kids, has also torn apart a lot of marriages and had an impact in a lot of businesses. You're talking about communication, alignment, making sure that we're on the same page. All of that is great. That also doesn't suggest that there's not strain that can be felt in any of the choices that we make. And so that, I think, is what I'd like to understand is, how is it that the two of you ground, communicate, and connect, like with where your priorities and your alignment lies? And how do you communicate about those timelines or seasons where the sacrifice might be a little bit more extreme? Because those are the things that have also torn apart businesses, because if the founder is not stable and everything else falls apart, right? If we don't have the right partner, the right communication, the right tools in that side, then the all work and no family or all work and no play can only run so far if we have a desire to prioritize family or play, right? And again, that's not to say that that is your priority, but that's what I'd like to understand is, how do you navigate the complexities of this extreme nature of what you're building right now with making sure that it sounds like you love your partner, your wife, you have love and respect for her, same thing for your kids. So your vision obviously is to still have them be in your life. How do you plan to make that happen and navigate this season?
That's a good question. So I think, what typically happens in a startup, like once you scale to a particular point, you typically get these what's called lieutenants. Let's call the heads or whatever you want to call them. And essentially they start running more of your business and you become what I call the real CEO of what or maybe that's the next level CEO, whatever, what I call it. And then that typically means you are freeing up a lot of your time, right? Mm-hmm. So delegating big chunks of what you do to people that are as good as you are or better, arguably. Yep. I mean, it's all like, there's definitely this saying, right? Everybody says you should be hiring people that are better at you at this particular job. I can tell you, I'm having a hard time to passing on the baton to different people, finding them and passing on, right?
And then trusting that they can do it even to 80 or 90% proficiency that you can, right?
That is also the problem, right? And I'm pretty good at things I do. So again, the bar is high, right? So I have, my biggest problem right now as a founder is hiring the right talent. I think a lot of founders have the same problem. Now, so that's one. But I think, my wife, we are definitely in understanding that, this company scales and then things definitely change. But there is definitely that high intensity period. And how long it will last, yes, we don't have an agreement right now. And it will be intense. Now, she also has career aspirations. She's not a lady that sits at home and does nothing.
Which means she's not going to be happy doing that full time forever either, right?
Exactly. So she has career aspirations. She's very annoyed because, in her eyes, I'm doing all these things. I'm in all these newspapers. Doesn't matter, And then, she believes, it has an impact on her, right? And you can see that, when we go into this, some sort of conflicting argument, about anything really. And then she starts to bring this up, right? Because, these things that you're kind of are boiling up ultimately, right? She will vomit out everything on you when that moment comes.
100%.
And then she will go at you, everything that she has. So,
well, cause the things can build and they can build passive aggressiveness and resentment and right, like frustration. And I'm saying this from personal experience, right? I'm reflecting back elements of things that I know have existed in our world. And, there was a moment 3-ish years ago when we had to burn everything to the ground, and I did it on purpose to realign and reset things up, but I lost my momentum in my pipeline. And I know what it takes to redevelop that, right? My whole focus was on wrapping this up and setting the foundation. And to the point that my wife was like, I don't know if I see the path anymore. She'd lost faith, right? The revenue was not in the direction it needed to be. The expenses were not in the direction they needed to be. We were right sizing, but it was one of those moments that I had to say, give me 12 months. Give me 12 months.
I see where you're coming from. I think
so that's what I'm curious about is if this is actively happening with your wife right now, like, how are you communicating about it? And what is the projected focus or intent around timeline to start to free up some more of your time to allow her to have some of the space or the freedom that she's asking for?
That's a very good question. I think the way I think about it is I'm deep down also very selfish. As in, I think the overall outcome, for the couple, in this case, me and my partner, the much better outcome will come if I plow ahead where failure is not an option. You're essentially, somebody has to be in mindset. Failure is not an option. I have to plow ahead. This will happen. That's the sort of founder, mindset, right? Failure is
That's where I was in the example I just told you. I was literally like, this is going to happen. I'm going to make it happen.
Yes. Now you need to manage the, let's call it the family business. The way I think about that is, yes, it has, you can call it repercussions on your relationship, but we've been through rough patches in the past. And I think we build up this sort of, relationship where we've gone through a lot of rough stuff in the past. So we're sort of experienced together, that things don't go, they're not, always great, let's say. And
my wife and I say it's like we're bonded through war, like we've been to battle together. It's like a different level of bond when you've been together that long, right?
Yeah. So we've been doing that for years and years, and you just have this bond that, nothing can separate us. And yes, but then somebody has to be the dominant party in the relationship. I think that is always, so what I'm seeing typically a problem is that if there's two very dominant individuals in a relationship, then in a lot of cases, there's a lot of friction and couples break up. And the best couples are the ones that I'm seeing, at least, where one party is just more dominant than the other one. It doesn't matter who it is, man or woman. And in our case, that's me. I'm a lot more dominant party in the relationship. So I'm kind of leading the relationship, and how we have to do things in timelines, whatever, is kind of up to me. Yeah, so there's definitely, it's like politics. If you keep on promising, forever and never delivering, the people will start, rebelling. So it's something that you need to manage. I don't know, take out, treat her nicely, right? If you're the dominant party, make sure you're paying, for the mortgage, for the rent, for all taxes, dinners, like even like simple things like that. Like financially, you're not ever thinking that we'll be ever in a bad spot financially.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been always paying for rent, mortgage, taxes, bills, whatever. It would always go on my credit card. And then on my bank account, I issued also a second credit card just for her to use on a daily basis. So that's just an example where, yes, Frank does his thing.
Yeah.
But I think what typically happens in the couple is, especially, a woman has, kids, whatever, right? You always think about finances. But
it's one of the biggest things that breaks people apart. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you always are in the zone of where there were never issues with finances, then you are in this sort of, safety zone, right? Where whatever Frank does, as long as this thing, is always there, financial stability in the family, it's fine, right? And that's how I think a lot of, that's how psychologically, how it works in a lot of couples.
There's an element of truth to that. And I identify with that as well. I would tell you that my lived experience is different because it was, I had always financially provided, but I was not showing or providing some of the intellectual or emotional safety and strength within the home that I could have, right? I was not in the same level of leadership. And I was living in a very largely disconnected way. And so I know for myself, there was a point when I found my bank account full, but me empty and not having all those components where I wanted. And yet when I told you about this dynamic 3 years ago, where it cost us a lot of money and everything was taking place, I had actually less money than I had ever had, but every other account in terms of connection, love, intimacy was full. And so I'm not in any way suggesting that you can't have both or that they won't be both, but you're correct. There is an element of the financial providing that gives it. And Frank, I want to just also say it's obvious to me how much you are attempting to and are being truthful and vulnerable and navigating a discussion when I know in many shows and many podcasts, you're going to talk about all the brilliant stuff you've been doing in sales and we're getting there. And I know that I've actually taken a little bit of a different approach that I know is not within your normal rhythm. And so I want to say thank you for your playing in this respect and also doing so in a way that allows you to navigate your truth and also answer the questions. And so I hope you know, and I said it in the beginning of the show, I have respect for you. I like you. I think that what you're doing in the world is great. And so when I ground these things, it's because these are the dynamics behind business that most people don't talk about. That we carry into our offices, into our teams, into our work, that if our priorities really are across family and health and our businesses, they can at times feel like they're in conflict instead of in congruence, right? And so these are the pieces that can either make us really successful when we get deeply aligned or can also rip us apart in all of the other respects. And so you're in a position right now where you're working, you're communicating, and you're on a trajectory to have it all work out. One thing that jumped out at me, and then I want to shift because I want to give you a little bit of a break. I know I went at a few specific things a little more deep on that side, but just, talking about your wife and this partnership that you have, you proposed to her 6 days after knowing her. I got to know that story. Like, you just knew instantly. Like, give us that, because that says a lot about the connection and the love that you clearly have developed with her.
Well, I mean, if you've been in sales for, such a long time, you need to know how to close somebody, I guess.
I always say my wife was my best sales job ever. Yes.
When I talk about different things, with a lot of friends, etc., in my eyes, everything is a pipeline. Everything is a sales pipeline, essentially. So that's how I think about things.
That's how your brain works. It makes sense. I get it.
And sometimes I think, when people know that's the right person for you, why wouldn't you want to propose, as soon as possible?
I agree.
Like that, to me, that just means you don't you don't know how to make decisions. Like the reason why people are more, longer and longer in the relationship, because they're trying to do what's called de-risk. And I'm just very good at de-risking, super fast. If you probably think of it this way. And then there's no reason not to make a decision, essentially, and kind of plow ahead. And I typically, doesn't matter marriage or any, like I make a purchase, whatever. I do it on a 80-20 basis. Everything's on an 80-20 basis in my life. Doesn't matter how long you spend with a partner. It's still, I believe, it's sort of an 80-20 decision in a lot of cases, because the more you spend actually time with that person, sleeping in the same bed, etc. Sometimes you're like, damn, you figure out actually that individual has a lot of downsides, and you don't want to say yes, when they propose, So you may as well propose.
That's what my wife discovered with me. She just unwrapped like more layers of garbage as the longer we went. So
yeah. So, I mean, there's the thing, like, there's also that, right? Yeah. You spend a very long time with your partner, and then all these downsides that just keep compounding, every single month, every single year. And I don't know, maybe, if I would propose to her after, 2 years or something, and back then I was a workaholic, maybe she would have said no. Like you just don't know. But I think, a lot of people like people that know what they want.
Yeah.
And know what they want fast.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, a skill, decision making, and fast decision making. Whether you are an investor, VC, startup founder, whatever that is, right? A buyer. Time is money. That's another way probably you can look at this. But for me, there's no financial gain. You could typically look at it from another standpoint. There's actually a lot to lose. So I mean,
I was told a long time ago by one of the smartest investors in the world that the greatest investment you can make is in picking the right partner and staying with them, because it's really difficult to build wealth when you're splitting it in half time and time again.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in my case, actually, the interesting story was that I woke up literally on day 6, and I was like, fuck it, I'll propose to her. So I went to a shop, bought a ring, said, hey, can we meet, later on, at this restaurant, whatever. And then later on in the park, I just proposed to her. Now, the fun story is when I, went on my knee and proposed to her and say, would you marry me? She didn't know what to answer. And I said to her, wait a minute, I have to tell you something before you answer, actually. And what I did tell her, I was already married. So that is the interesting story. And I never told her actually in 6 days that I was already married. Now, the thing is, so I was married to a lady from Uzbekistan. Very smart lady, very beautiful, etc. But what happened was, after a few years, she actually cheated on me while I was on the trip in India. And then we couldn't really properly divorce, because in the UK, the way that it works is you have to split everything that you own, including the house. So we own the house together. So I bought a house when I was, I mortgaged it when I was 20, very early age. So, I was back in those days, even in the mindset. I was not wealthy at all, but I knew how to, get cash, work gazillions of jobs, save up some money over 6 months, get a mortgage, and it's a much better thing to do than paying rent forever. But so when we had to split, we just couldn't. It takes essentially years to sell the house and then go to the court, whatever which I also had to do, etc. So I was single and ready to mingle. And, that's, so, even though I'm married, I would not, wait or something. So,
okay.
Yeah, but that was the fun moment.
Here's the $1 million question. Did she say yes the first time you asked her?
Yes.
Well, that's pretty epic too, that she said yes in 6 days. By the way, I knew on my first date I was going to marry my wife, but there wasn't a chance in hell I could ask her that early. Otherwise, there would have been a guaranteed no. I did need to warm her up a little bit. And I'm happy that I did, because still now, almost 19 years later, when I wake up in the morning and she's still in the bed next to me, I consider it a win right out of the gate, bro. So we're good. Thank you for going there with me. I also have been in sales, for a very, very long time. It's been a big part of my background. It's always been business and relationship generation. And, what you hit on and what you talked about very early is, the top of the funnel. I would suggest that the top of the funnel, to the point of opening a door, is the hardest part. in sales. And if you have a proficient or good team or product or any of the above, from the time you get the conversation or the opportunity, the easy stuff flows from there, right? Like the hardest part's top of funnel. And not only to open the doors, but to have enough consistently in the pipeline to allow it to have some consistent and predictable growth, right? This is like the fundamental of sales. And to your point with pipelines, it is a numbers game. It's a volume game. And there's only so many metrics you can pull. The volume you drive through the top, the amount that you're able to convert, right, to opportunities, and then the ones that you're able to convert into sales. And if you get better in each one of those metrics, guess what? Sales go up, profit goes up, and you start to accomplish one of the things you talked about. So I wanted to highlight, yes, it's a very big problem. Talk to us a little bit about where and how you discovered this problem that existed in sales through your journey and course. And in the 6 products that you've developed thus far, how are they specifically approaching or attacking a top of funnel activity to allow that part to always be full?
So that's a good question. So that's exactly how I look at the world of sales. There's the top of the funnel and there's the bottom of the funnel. And it feels like nothing is really broken in the bottom of the funnel. And there's gazillions of softwares there. I think it's pretty solid, essentially, if you look at the market. You know, there's no need to disrupt anything in the bottom of the funnel. And I know there's a lot of, new startups popping up, etc. But yeah, if you ask any founder, any sales leader, and essentially there's been also a lot of surveys that I was also, looking on the internet, including research even by SalesForge. What do the reps actually do? And they don't do a lot of prospecting. They're just busy doing admin stuff, etc. And
they're order placers more often than not than people who open doors, right?
Yeah. And then I just know a lot of founders, and essentially and everybody would tell you, Frank, I'm really good with, speaking to people and really closing them. And pretty much like 90+% of people will say, I don't know how to generate pipe. And that's the opportunity. Like if you speak to any, I don't know, smart person, investor, etc., go after the biggest problem, especially if it hasn't been solved in full. Like there's no solution in our market right now where you would say that's like the Google, that's like the number one. Everybody, like, it's very subjective as to what's number one in this space. It depends on who you're going to ask. But like, objectively, there's no such a thing as like Google number one or ChatGPT number one, or like GPT is number one in the limb right now and all that, right? There's no consensus that somebody is number one because there's a lot of people that are very, very sort of frustrated. And it's not just that it's difficult to generate pipeline, but there's more and more competition popping up because it's so much easier to build software. And what happens is, so the more companies keep popping up, you can't raise prices, right? Because what happens these days is your cost base keeps going up due to inflation, etc.
Yep.
You can't raise prices because if you're gonna do that, you have a gazillions of competitors. You will lose customers essentially, right? So raising prices is not as easy as it used to be like 5-10 years ago. And yes, so if you also understand that most people have a hard time generating pipeline, and then there's also consensus amongst I think, let's call it a small group of people that training humans all the time on how to build pipeline is just not very efficient. And then you look at the attrition problem in sales. I have hired and fired hundreds of salespeople in my career. That's a lot of bodies. And we would hire a lot more, heads into different seats, even in advance, because we would always predict that every month, 3 to 5 reps would either leave or would be fired. So we had to, pre-fill all those seats, when I was, VP sales for a sales team of 50. So, and I was like, something is broken here. Humans are not built to do sales, So I typically say, like for every 10 salespeople that you hire, only one really is natural, and 1 in 10, right? 2 to 3 people can be sort of trained up to be, somewhat good as the person that's really natural, right? They're very coachable, they're the sponge, etc., right? There's a high potential, right? And they really become great employees at the company. But then 60%, and this typically applies to sales, is just what's called dead wood. It's not accurate. And the reason why you're hiring is because you typically, as a VP sales, you have the pressure to attain your targets. And when you look at your, spreadsheet, your Excel, you're like, these are my conversion rate. That means I just need to plow more bodies. That's what the math says, right? Let me just more. And I thought that was just wrong.
But that is, by the way, what most sales organizations do. I can speak to and attest to the organization that we'd built. And over the course of almost 15 years, there was about an 85% failure rate on the sales and business development type roles within our organization. And that was the philosophy. Let's just shove more bodies in there. Because if we shove more in, then that 15% will stick. And it's like, no. So I had to just jump on that. I didn't mean to interject and interrupt. I want you to keep going because you're right. This is a failure point for how most organizations and leadership approach sales. It's not volume on your external sales talent. It's volume on opportunities and directing it to the right talent to be able to move it.
Yeah. So for me, it's a very, very big and difficult problem. And I don't think that a lot of people just grasp fully how complicated that whole problem is. It's so complicated that you need to build multiple softwares, which is how we got to building these multiple softwares. Because otherwise you will we want to become what we call the number one software stack for pipeline building. There's a company called Gong, and they literally dominate the bottom of the funnel really well. And we want to become what we call the Gong of the top of the funnel. So when I think about, any function, even pipeline generating function, I'd always think about these three things I've learned back at Google, actually, the first time. To run on the work very effectively, you need what's called is the people bubble. Essentially, you need the right people to do the job. And for me, that's the 40%. And then you're like, damn, the 60% is dead wood. Why are they there? How do you when I was thinking about this problem, I was really thinking about the CAC inefficiency. So the cost of customer acquisition is just going through the roof. So acquiring net new dollars is becoming more and more expensive. And if you look in your line items, what's costing you how much, like labor essentially is the number one line item. So really, if you're looking to make a big difference to companies' profitability, you need to figure out how to run the whole thing on 40% of the labor, not the 100%, right? So how everything has to look like essentially to achieve that. So people is one, right? Having the right people. But for me, that's 40%. Then the other one is what's called the process. So essentially process means, so the old school process is more bodies. So essentially all the systems have been built around bigger teams, more pipeline, more revenue. And I think that process is old school. It will be going away. And we're going to see a lot of smart companies that will be blending essentially humans with automations to maximize output levels and minimize cost per unit. So let's say meeting booked. So that's the process part. So you kind of have to think about what is the new process essentially that you are building for the companies, and why that's the future, not the old school way of plowing more bodies into the system. And then the final thing is the technology. So I was using the legacy tech, right, which was about let's hire more people. They charge me per seat, and whenever I asked them to build something to improve my conversion rates, they just said no. And then you understand that they're not really interested to improve the conversion rates significantly. And this company is not doing well right now. So essentially it's obvious, So this was also what sparked, my, let's call it interest to put an end to this, because that company there's more companies, but these companies will not change essentially. So as a VP sales, I was using one of these companies. I had all these 50 bodies. And really, what I'm building right now is for my former self, because they just didn't listen. So it's about reimagining how the pipeline building process will look like for different companies in the world. And it's not just in the US. We're also thinking what we call globally. How does it have, how it will look like in Japan, for example, that we're entering right now? How it will look like, I don't know, somewhere in Europe or US, etc. So how do you build, again, a software stack that can be used, in different places in the world as well? There's kind of cultural differences as well, how things have to be done or etc. So it's something that you have to take into account. But really, when I think about this problem, I'm always the guy that goes big or goes home. So is this a big enough of a problem? Is this a big enough of a challenge where I say, damn, this looks like, a summit to climb. It's going to take, a long time, potentially a lifetime. I want to be done in 5-10 years, but potentially a lifetime, no worst case. But you're going to leave a legacy, to, the whole world as to how companies in B2B build pipeline. And then the other challenge is, yes, it's such a big challenge that you realize how much software you will need to build. Because ultimately what we're doing, we're a bit like Apple ecosystem. You're buying essentially different product, products from the same ecosystem. So Apple has Apple ID, we have Forge ID. You log into different softwares, they natively talk to each other. Is that ease of use that we're looking to create? But and again, it also kills the problem that exists in a lot of software categories. There's a lot of point solutions that you need to stitch together, and they're very expensive than this overall stack. And I have far superior unit economics if a customer buys from me not just one subscription, it buys multiple, right? Then wow, your efficiency levels are so much more superior than the efficiencies levels from other companies. Also, the problem is, in our category, we have gazillions of competitors. This is like one of the worst categories to go in. If you ask any investor, investors will typically tell me, Frank, listen, you're a great guy, you have a great team, etc. But you chose like one of the worst categories to go into.
But you like the red ocean ones. You like that.
Yeah, but they don't get it. They don't intrinsically know who Frank Sondors is. And I think I'm not also a very typical founder. A typical founder would not tell you, I just love competition. I just love, eating up market share. It's just, what I do, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I just love doing that. It gives me more dopamine hits, when competitors even give me compliments that the strategy that we have and everything that we're doing is very unique, very interesting, etc. And the funny thing is, we actually power a lot of our competitors. Many of our competitors are our customers. So, we don't just sell direct or through agencies, whatever. We also power competitors. So I always say you also have to play it smart, right? So if you have a lot of competitors, sure, you can go and kind of compete against all of them if you want to, but that will drive up your cost. Instead, I think the smartest companies in the world actually work together. So let's take an example. Google and Apple, right? Google pays a lot of money to Apple to install.
Yeah, they feed each other. Yep.
Yes, but they compete. But they found a way to work together. That's just a simple example.
No, it's a perfect example. Yeah. I need to be cheeky and challenge you on something just a little bit, because you said it just a second ago. You said, I'm only hoping to do this for 5 to 10 years. But yet, as a self-identified workaholic that wants to build things, I have a really hard time believing that you're just going to hang it up in 5 to 10 years, even if you hit the metric, right? and so I just there's a little bit of playfulness there. And then the other side of it that I think is interesting, and I'm actually leading this into a question here in a second. You talk about the gap in external funding and investors is their inability to intrinsically know who Frank Sondors is.
No. The thing is, I'm a first time
Did I misinterpret that? What did you say? They don't intrinsically know who Frank Sondors is? Who?
The problem
Who doesn't know?
The problem, like the investors, the VCs, whatever. The thing is, we are all three of us, 3 co-founders. We're first time founders. So there's no history that this guy, Frank Sondors, knows what he's doing. So as a result, doesn't matter what this guy, Frank, says. You brush it off.
There's no external social proof based on whatever they're looking at for metrics. And so where I'm coming from with that isn't that the case with any new product, any new company that's launching? And so then it comes down to the founders to cast the vision to intrinsically teach others who we are and the solutions we provide. So that's my inherent challenge to you is where do you allow yourself to further in line into a level of congruence to tighten up even your message around the solutions you provide so that the marketplace or potential investors can actually see the potential? Because it's there, right? It is there. It's top of funnel. But that's where I just cheekily kind of challenge a little bit is it's like, that's your job in sales to convey and teach who you intrinsically are and the value that's in it, right? So this is no different than anything else, but I want to bring it down to some specifics. You've said you built 6 pieces of software. I also agree with the specificity, the need to weave them together into an ecosystem that communicates and integrate, right? Just like we're leading with teams of people, teams of technology need to operate the same way. Same as our inability to communicate our vision or our value to an investor would look no different if we are incapable of communicating that to our clients, right? It's all a part of the same spectrum. So what I'm getting at here is what are the specific solutions that you built? What is the solution that each one addresses? And how do they communicate with each other? Because what you're talking about and where you're leading it, I do believe to be on the leading edge of what I'm seeing in the space. So I want to make it really accessible and tangible to the listeners because there is value. And the problem that you're discussing is probably the greatest issue in every business I consult with is generation of top line revenue, which always comes back to pipeline. right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wanting to double down that yes, it's the people sometimes that get in the way of making that happen, but it's the singular problem in almost every business. So help us understand the solutions, why they're there, and how they communicate with each other to simplify people's lives.
Good question. So let's start with what I call the pinnacle product. The pinnacle product is what's called Agent Frank, named after me. So think of it as an SDR, but it's an AI SDR. Now, Agent Frank operates on top of the...
For those that don't know the acronym of SDR, I know what it is. What is it?
It's a sales development rep. Essentially, it's typically the rep that's assigned to build a pipeline for your company, whether that's through an outbound motion or inbound motion.
Just wanted to make sure for those who didn't know it could track. Go ahead, keep going.
So naturally, in order to reduce headcount, the part of the puzzle that needs to happen, you need to figure out how to increase automation levels within this org, and AI agent essentially is a means to an end, but it's not the full solution. Essentially, the way that the market looks today, which I think is, again, a bit broken, there's essentially a lot of the legacy tech, which is only designed for humans. And then there's a lot of new tech popping up, which is all about AI agents. But it's just not how it works. I mean, if you're a sales leader, you're not going to really use two softwares to build pipe. You want to build pipe from one single, let's call it, centralized software. So I'm thinking of it typically like Google Ads accounts. And within the software, you've got your humans doing their things, but also AI agents in parallel. You can run even an A/B test. Are the humans better or AI agents better? And there's multitudes of upside and downsides. But either way, so we definitely are building the agent. And we have right now running one of the best AI agents in the world. We call it Agent Frank because we thought, let's not give it like a random name. I mean, I've been in sales for 10 years. Let's just call the first agent Agent Frank. We're going to roll out other agents because we're looking to build it's called teams. But the first one's going to be called Agent Frank. So that's the pinnacle product. And it literally just, all it does, it sits on the other, what we call forges. So everything is a forge at SalesForge apart from Agent Frank. So the Agent Frank, so that agent, he naturally lives in SalesForge. This is where you can use the software we call, you have the human path, you can, send out emails, do LinkedIn, or you can spin up the agent. It's like and or. We're big believers that the blend is the ultimate setup, but there may be some examples where using the agent doesn't make sense and vice versa. There are some people that just don't want to build pipeline at all. So Frank, I'm not, lifting a finger. I just want the agent to build pipe for me, and that's it. I was like, okay, cool. We can set it up for you.
I agree with you. I do believe that the hybrid model is going to be the most successful, is the best and most effective now, and will be the most scalable over time.
Yes.
But right now we're seeing a blend of the full spectrum, and it's all over the place. From full replacement to almost no utilization, right?
Yeah, because my job will be, I'm in the red ocean, right? To go after the big boys. And the big boys, essentially, that's the human softwares. And for me to displace that software, I need to make sure that I'm catering for the humans, because I will never displace. And if you're not going to be able to displace that software, you're never going to be big. That's really how things work. And I think to a lot of people, it's common sense. No, sorry, it's not a lot of common sense to a lot of people. I think people are just, crazy going about their AI agents and then, whatever, But you have to kind of think about it kind of 5-10 years down the road, how things will just pan out in the world. So anyway, so we have the agent, then we have the core product called SalesForge. That's where the agent lives. Let's call that, that's software too. You can operate humans in there, right? Then we have, so the product right now focuses heavily on email. And the first and foremost, the biggest problem in email was always the deliverability problem. So essentially, over time, more and more emails have been sent. There's more and more, automations in the world, more and more companies in the world sending emails, etc. So buyers are essentially overwhelmed with the emails that they're receiving. So what Microsoft and Google have done, because they dominate 90% of B2B, essentially email ecosystem, what they've done is they started to increase policing essentially in the ecosystem, started to introduce rules, etc. And what it means is so the way you used to send emails, say 5 years ago, you're not able to do it anymore. So essentially it's getting harder and harder and harder with every year to deliver the emails. And the legacy tech that I'm talking about that exists out there, it's not designed for the new rules of the game. So we are building, so the first problem that we're really solving, we are essentially trying to figure out how do we actually send emails that more of them land in the primary versus the legacy tech. Because if emails don't land, nothing works. There's no point of the agent, no point crafting great email. There's no point in anything, right? If things land in spam. So that was the first problem that we had to solve. So SalesForge, from what we call execution standpoint, the way we do things, etc., it solves that problem. Then what really needs to happen is you need to have what we call the dedicated infrastructure to actually send emails. Because the problem essentially with the policing is if you're sending way too many emails because you have a big SDR team from your primary business domain, then every email that you're sending out as what's called an unknown sender to the other organization. Mm-hmm. You have essentially a high probability of being spam reported, blacklisted, etc. And you're hurting every time your domain when you're sending out an email. You can hurt it to an extent where all of your emails start landing in spam. That's like the worst case scenario. But essentially, to de-risk, the only way to de-risk is if you decouple any association from your primary domain over to the secondary domains. So let's say we have our primary domain SalesForge.ai. We would set up, try SalesForge.ai, get SalesForge.ai, etc. And we would only use those domains to reach out to new customers, right? And this is how you de-risk anything happening to your domains. And these domains burn meaning after typically 4 to 6 months, you'll need to replace them. Because ultimately, when you buy these domains, you're looking to burn them to the ground, essentially. Yeah,
you're warming them up in a quick period, and then you're using them to the capacity that you can, and spreading the load of outreach across multiple agents that are sending across multiple different domains. Love the structure. It's actually really similar to something that we had utilized and built a couple of years back. And but I want to hear where you're going with this, because I love what you're doing. And you're right. In every component that you've addressed so far, these were the core issues that we were facing and trying to address in a variety of different ways. So, yes, you're spot on. So we've got that component now across the different domains. What's next?
So there's 2 infrastructure products. Again, as an example, when I told you we're powering a lot of competitors, we're powering them with our infrastructure. Again, it's part of the strategy to have these multiple softwares allows you to take that Forge or that module and go and power your competitors. So we power it now over 20 competitors around the world.
Love it.
So we have a product which is only designed to improve deliverability. So it does what's called email warm-up. It tests your DNS, tests for any blacklists. It does also what's called placement tests. A placement test, essentially, it just checks, you can check it daily or weekly, whatever, whether your emails land in spam or not. It's something you want to, periodically check, to make sure and give that confidence that actually you have good deliverability. So we have just that product just for that. We have a huge demand, again, across our competitors. And also, we're also looking to de-risk the flagship product, SalesForge. So we, have shifted the warm-up out of SalesForge. So that's product 5, and the final product, which is, it's launching this month, but we have already customers using it. But essentially, it's called LeadsForge.ai. LeadsForge.ai is there to solve the data problem or the leads problem. So we thought about how is everybody getting their leads out there, and they would go to a typical database. There's a lot of databases out there for leads, like hundreds of them. But the problem is that, so we're targeting the software for the unsavvy people. We're definitely not building the software for people that know what they're doing. So an unsavvy user, I'm just looking for leads.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will just Google it, right? I'm looking for leads. And yes, there are databases, etc. But typically these, you just don't know which is the best database to take.
And at the end of the day, they all have some level of flaw in them anyway, right? Like buying lists is buying lists, and you're hoping you're buying as accurate data as possible, right?
Yes. And then there are these companies that have popped up, which are like, Excel on steroids, where you can pull data from different databases. But the problem with those softwares is that, again, you need to know what you're doing. And then I thought to myself, what would be the easiest way to pull data? And that's exactly what we're doing right now. Essentially, we're building a ChatGPT-like interface, and we're connecting to hundreds of databases in the world behind the scenes. So you're making a query or like a search. I'm looking for these X leads, and then we're trying to find the leads across multiple databases, to increase leads coverage, but naturally to also to maximize quality. And then there's the next step, actually, which is very, very important, is to do what's called lead qualification programmatically within that software. And then you can push, again, those leads wherever you want to. So we're always about, take it wherever you want to, push it to HubSpot, Salesforce, our competitors. We don't mind. That's the type of software we are. We work with competitors, nice and friendly. You can also push it to Salesforce. There's gazillions of benefits why you want to use everything in our ecosystem, right? This is how we're sucking in the users into our ecosystem, because people will realize that much easier to do everything with one vendor. So that's the final product. So the success in our eyes, right? So I said there's a gazillions of product, but if somebody needs like a framework, what does even success look like today in the world of email? So pillar one is what we covered, the data. You need to ensure that you're only communicating with the right leads, because if you're going to send any form of communication to the bad leads, it's gonna have a negative impact on your whole performance of the campaign. So this is why it's so important to figure out, and it's a very difficult, again, problem to solve, the data problem for the unsavvy users in particular.
Yep.
So that's problem one.
Scrubbing data can be one of the biggest headaches in any type of that process. So you're spot on. Yeah.
Then email infrastructure. So you can definitely buy Google accounts and Outlook accounts, etc. So if you have ever set up any domains and DNS records and Google accounts, it's a pain in the butt. And so we've built, the two softwares that we operate, just a bit differently. We did it in a way that you can literally set it up in about 5 minutes. So that speed, ease of use, and the cost reduction versus, say, Gmail account, which costs about $8, and we charge like, $3 or $4. It's like a no-brainer for a lot of people. Then there is there's the what I call it, the execution strategy that happens in SalesForge. So as an example, we always recommend to only send like 2 or 3 emails to a prospect, as an example, instead of 10 emails. It's about essentially how leads will get executed and minimizing, let's call it, the spam rates, maximizing success, etc. So all of that has to happen in the execution software. And then the last piece.
By the way, I love that one philosophy that you even just shared, though. 3 instead of 7 to 10. That's a massive thing, because people are getting spammed like crazy right now. And that's why there's so many things that are setting up filters. And so it also feels more body than human-y when it's that many times. So I just had to pause and say, I love the philosophy, because you're ensuring that the work you're putting into the front end with the data, the scrubbing of the data, the accuracy of the data, right? And then the deployment of it is giving you the greatest amount of return that you can. And that's again, it's all about the conversion in each one of these areas. So I love that philosophy. Didn't mean to interrupt again. I wanted to hit on that because it's an important point that many don't address.
Yeah, but it's not about the number of emails, because essentially with every email that you're sending to that particular individual, you're increasing the probability of receiving a spam report. And so in this day and age, you need to do everything you can to kill the spam reports. Essentially be a nice human. Like, that's another way probably to look at it. And just maybe the final thing on that, pillar 3 essentially is also the pacing as an example, right? Like, so some people do it. Yes, you're going to send 2 emails out. So I'm going to send 1 email out and the next one goes out tomorrow. No, don't do that. Send the next one, next week. Because essentially you have to think about the pacing of the sequence of the campaign, like super important, because the more aggressive you are, if you send too many emails in the same week, again, it increases the probability of spam. So all these things is something that typically 80-90% of typical user base just does not know. And we're not in the business of training every human on the planet on how to build pipe. So the way that we build software, we try and sort of, let's call it, minimize what you can click on.
I love it. It's all about the user experience and simplifying it. I mean, at the end of the day, what you just hit on is really clear, right? It's data, it's speed and compressing time, right? Because it's not just for faster. Sometimes it's about the time savings because of the process that's been built. And then it's the execution. And at the end of the day, if you utilize the tools and the stack around it, it is one of those things that you make an investment that if the machine isn't working, you change 1 or 2 of those variables and all of a sudden you start refining it and it starts to dial it in. And that's what you're trying to do, is to make pipeline development and sales more accessible to those who are not wired to open as many doors as maybe you or I might be, or others who might be in that top 10, 15% of sales that we talk about as being the success rate. I love it, brother.
So so I'm just missing the final pillar, which is the copy.
Oh, go. I didn't mean to cut you off on that. Yeah. Please tell us the final pillar.
It's the copy pillar, essentially. So you may have, the right leads, the right infrastructure, the right software to send. But if the copy does just
the message,
resonate,
yes,
the relevance isn't there. Even things that people don't think about. If you're targeting anybody in Europe, so I always crack this joke. If you're gonna send an email in English to a Frenchman, it will backfire. You will get close to 0% reply rate. But if you change the language from English to French, suddenly your reply rate shoots up to a 5% or something. So there's definitely like even these things that you have to kind of think about back of your head. It's not about English only speaking markets. There's definitely communication that happens in other parts, of the world in different languages. But crafting a relevant copy that will resonate and will drive replies is a totally different, pillar where we invest money, AI
It
engineers,
is.
etc. But in simple, form, what we do, we just look at what we call programmatically always at two data sets. One data set is what we call the seller data, or why the heck you're reaching out, kind of, so it's essentially the value prop. So,
Yep.
and you can have multiple value props in different languages that you can
Yep.
build out in SalesForge. And then you have also this, what's called the knowledge base section. You can upload anything about your company, your sales playbook, your pricing FAQs, anything in there. So we have let's call that digital brain. We know as much about your company as a typical SDR in your company. So you just dump that in there. So we have everything that we need to know about your company. And then the second data set is what we call the buyer data. What do we know about that particular individual at that particular company? So we go and do web crawling, we would access all possible data on the web about that person. So then we, programmatically stitch these two data sets, together. Typically the value prop doesn't change. For a campaign, you set up this value prop, this language, whatever. And then what does programmatically change is what do we know about each and every individual? So we go and crawl the web about each and one of them and try to do the best possible job at driving ultimately replies from the prospects. But what I want to say is, even though you're doing a kick-ass job on all the 4 pillars, you're still gonna fail in a lot of cases.
Of course.
And so why people would fail? If everything's set up, everything that Frank told me is set up correctly. Well, a lot of companies don't have what's called product market fit. A lot of companies don't have what's called also product channel fit. So you maybe are driving an excellent performance on Google Ads, SEO, whatever else that you're doing, but you have no experience running in the past cold emails, or if you did, you never had good results. So what makes you believe that even though you're gonna be successful, you're going to do everything, right across the 4 pillars, that you will actually generate return. So, a lot of cases where literally spend, let's say 10K on Google Ads. It's the same with us. You just that it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? With Google. But ultimately, a lot of people are definitely testing the software and trying to figure out whether this channel could be a channel for them. And if not, they move on. So the downside of our business, because we're trying to kind of blend our revenues a bit, but we're heavily in the SMB space. And there's a lot of companies that sort of, let's call it come and go, they die, go out of business, etc. People don't even have a strong offer, or they are in such a saturated market. So for example, recruitment. So there's gazillions of recruiters. They're all sending cold emails. The offer is, whenever I look at the email, exactly the same, or SEO services, exactly the same offer. There's no difference.
Yeah. And that's all in messaging, right? And that's all in clarity in who you are, the value that you offer. I mean, it's about being able to communicate who you intrinsically are and what you offer is, whether it's a product or a service. And that's why I always say you can build all the right systems and tactics and strategies, but if you aren't clear in the voice, if you aren't clear in the tone and the message and what you're trying to convey, whether it's relevant and specific to the person that you're reaching out to or relevant and specific to the channel that you're reaching out to, either one will be a failure because you're just amplifying a flawed message. And that's where the authenticity and the voice is a big focus in the work that we do, is to layer in so that we're not amplifying a diluted voice and diluted impact. We're amplifying what's real. And your pillars all hit on that. I'm so happy you brought it back to the 4th pillar, because I would argue that is the most important of the 4. Because if the messaging isn't right, to your whole point exactly, just like communicating in a different language, it won't fucking matter, right? So then you're just wasting a ton of time and energy and resources on things that won't hit, even if the data is right, the speed is right, and the execution is right. If the messaging is wrong, none of that matters. And so I'm really happy you grounded it. Brother man, I know we went a little longer today, and I'm grateful for your vulnerability, your truth, and everything. I know that people can find agentfrank.ai, can go to salesforge.ai. We'll put all of your links in the fields within the show notes. But if you were to give us a concise wrap-up on your philosophy or a message you want to leave people with, what would it be today, my friend?
The biggest thing to me is always move at the speed where competitors always feel like there's no way of stopping this team. This guy doesn't matter. You just out execute any competitor. And I think that's my biggest advice, my biggest, takeaway from this conversation, because ultimately that's what drives success in this business and in previous businesses where I was. We were just executing so well. So you need to figure out of how to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, that can look completely different depending on the business that you're in, the service that you offer. But this goes back to that old adage and analogy. It's like, go the extra mile. I've talked about this in many times with many people. The extra mile is pretty empty, right? And that's what's really funny is you can easily turn a red ocean into a blue ocean just by putting in that extra level of effort around execution to separate in that extra mile. And I think that's a beautiful piece of icing to just wrap up this great conversation. So Frank, my friend, thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your wisdom, sharing your intent and your focus and the impact in the world, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And for those of you that just watched Frank flip open his lid and jump right in, he talked about the need for sacrifice in seasons, the need for communication and clarity, the ability to recognize how we scale our lives, our relationships, our businesses, but ultimately to recognize the problem that you can uniquely solve in the world. For him, it's at the top of the line funnel. And if we pay attention at the highest level to even what he just talked about, it's always about data, the accuracy of data, the speed at which you can move or compress time, right? The ability to execute consistently and congruently for scaling over time, and then to align intentionality with message and connection, because otherwise none of it else matters. You can create solutions. You can outwin and outpace your competitors, but it is going to require you to go that extra level and flip open your lid and scan your can. We'll see y'all next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.